Shabbat Shalom. There's a famous picture, you've probably seen it, of a group of young men, Israeli soldiers, gazing up with a look of awe on their faces. They are in a place where no Jews had been for the past 19 years, a place where Jews had been turning towards, singing about, and dreaming of for nearly 2,000 years. At the moment the picture was taken, those men were starting to realize that the place they were in was once again in Jewish hands. They are at the retaining wall of the Temple Mount, the place known as the Kotel. I can't think of another single place that is treated with more reverence among Jews or has such a hold on us. It is a place, in other words, that is sacred. When I think about sacred space in Judaism, I tend to hear the great rabbi and philosopher, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, whispering in my ear. You may be familiar with Heschel's beautiful work, The Sabbath, in which he argues that Jews mark holy time, not holy space. Shabbat, he says, is a palace in time. For those of us who celebrate Shabbat and holidays regularly and who find those times spiritually nurturing, that message may resonate. No matter where we are, the distinct texture of time helps us experience holiness as we move through the week and the year. Furthermore, one of the great innovations of rabbinic Judaism, the innovation that allowed Judaism to survive after the destruction of the temple in the year 70, was the idea that we don't need any one particular place in order to celebrate Judaism. We can practice Judaism, form communities, and worship God wherever we go. The sense of connection that people once felt to God in the temple is something that we access instead through prayer, through ritual observances, and through festive meals that we share with each other. The rabbis make this explicit, imagining the Shabbat table as taking the place of the altar that was once in the temple, and calling our homes a mikdash me'at, a miniature tabernacle. And yet, I think we all intuitively understand that we feel different in different spaces. There's a Hasidic story about a child who went to the woods every afternoon to pray. Their teachers and parents always used to seek them out to bring them back inside. And once the child's parent asked, "Don't you know that God is the same everywhere?" The child responded, "God is the same everywhere, but I am not." The space we are in does impact us. And that is why I, for one, have been quite dismayed to see what has been happening at the Kotel, the retaining wall of the Temple Mount, that sacred space where Jews have prayed and turned towards for 2,000 years. Before 1948, the Kotel, while considered sacred by Jews, was simply a holy site that Jews would go to and pray at, irrespective of gender or of religious affiliation. Today, however, the part of the Kotel that is most accessible to visitors is unfortunately operated as an ultra-Orthodox synagogue in which behavior of visitors is tightly controlled. Now, there is a section of the Western Wall which is available for mixed prayer services, and incidentally, it's beautiful. I love it. It's a place where the history of the space is quite visible. You can look at the street where people walked on their way to the temple. You can see the marks of the shops where people used to buy birds to sacrifice. And you can see the rocks that were toppled during the Roman attack in the year 70. The history is right there. But the prayer space is small. Its entrance is not prominent and not nearly as prominent as the entrance for the ultra-Orthodox Kotel. In 2017, the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, voted to enact a compromise which would reconfigure the Kotel Plaza with prominent sections for ultra-Orthodox and egalitarian prayer, each accessed by the same initial entrance. Unfortunately, the plan was delayed and delayed and delayed, and a week ago, Prime Minister Bennett announced that the Kotel compromise will not be implemented, at least not during the tenure of the current government. Now, on the one hand, we might think, why does it matter? It's just a place. The real things that matter when it comes to religious equality in Israel are the ability for non-ultra-Orthodox Jews to get married, to get divorced, to convert, to be recognized as Jews. There are real civil liberties right now that non-Orthodox Jews don't have. So who cares about access to one spot? And in fact, the Masorti movement in Israel has long been focused on these other issues. It's only somewhat recently that they've been so involved in what goes on at the Kotel. But this current struggle for equality of access to a place hits deeply for many because of the symbolism involved. The Kotel is supposed to be a sacred space for all Jews, and by excluding certain groups from praying in that space, the government is making a statement about which kinds of Jews it considers legitimate. The Israeli government's actions are disappointing because they're a lost opportunity to create more sanctity by making the Kotel a place that ties Jews together. This week's Parashat Terumah, in fact, is about the place that served as an antecedent to the temple in Jerusalem, the very temple which was on a mount whose retaining wall is the Kotel. Terumah is all about the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert that traveled with the Jewish people wherever they went. And what is the Mishkan? It's a common place around which the Israelites used to mark special occasions. It's a place where Israelites can connect to God through sacrifice and through prayer. In other words, it's a sacred space. Now, unlike the temple, which we read about in the Haftarah, the Mishkan is portable and temporary with the people wherever they go. And so in some ways, it might be more evocative and more resonant for us Jews living today in the year 2022, because we are living in the era of the innovation that we can worship wherever we are. In every place and in every time, Jews have created spaces to do this. And we have this inheritance from living in exile of the ability, of the sense that while the temple was holy and while the tabernacle was holy, we also, each and every one of our communities, can create our own quasi-tabernacle, our own space in which to worship. And when we do so, we imbue those spaces with holiness. Our places that are sacred, and we do have many, those are sacred because they're the places where we come together and where we do sacred things. And over the past several weeks, over the nearly 2 years, of course, of the pandemic as well, many of us have felt the loss of being able to gather together in one common sacred space. There's an oft-quoted line from our Parsha this week that in some senses sums up what it means to have a holy space. In talking about the Mishkan, God tells Moses, "Va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocha." They should make me a sanctuary and I will dwell among them. In other words, that space where the Mishkan is put, well, that's an ordinary space. That can be anywhere. But once the Mishkan is built, God's presence is there. And it impacts not just the space where the Mishkan is standing, but the entire community. The verse doesn't say, build me a sanctuary and I will dwell in it. It says, build me a sanctuary and I will dwell among them. It's not just the people in the desert who had the ability to make a space holy. Every Jewish community has that power. In order for God to dwell among us, we need to do something first. We need to make our actions in the space holy. When we take on holy values and behaviors, then the spaces where we gather to do those things become places where we can sense God's presence. That is why it feels so offensive when our sacred spaces become the locations of hateful behavior. And that is why it's so painful to lose access to our sacred spaces. And that is also why it feels so painful to lose access to our sacred space for any reason. What is it that we have been missing during this time of the pandemic, many times during the pandemic? Well, many of us have mourned our distance from Temple Amunah, not because our building is such a wonderful building, which I do think it is a lovely building, but because of what takes place there. We miss the casual interactions. We miss the singing. We miss the togetherness. We miss the things our building made possible and which made our building a place where God could dwell among us. Our building is sacred because it facilitates encounters and connections within our community and also between us and God. Now, when I started thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, I thought I would be saying it from our sanctuary. I thought I would be celebrating the first day back in person after over a month of Zoom services. As it turns out, we were forced to wait yet again due to the ice outside to ensure that nobody would be injured while attempting to return to our space. Another expression, by the way, of our values. But ultimately, no matter where we are, there is a sacredness to this moment, to this encounter. Zoom, in fact, has served to create sacred spaces for us, spaces where we come together and connect around our shared values and the pursuit of meaning. What we do makes a space holy, and we have made Zoom space holy as well. My hope is that the next time we gather, we will finally have an opportunity for those of us who can to be present together in the same space. But regardless of where we are, let's continue engaging in the actions that make our spaces holy, both virtual and physical spaces. Let's continue to create holy connections in any way and in any place that we can. Shabbat Shalom.